Hi, I'm Sharon Lever, your host for Forrester's podcast, What It Means, where we explore the latest market dynamics impacting executives and their customers. Today, we'll discuss budget planning, where to invest, where to cut, and where to experiment. I'm joined by Group Research Directors Stephanie Baloris, Keith Johnston, and Sri Sridharan to discuss Forrester's 2025 Budget Planning Guides, which provide planning and budgeting recommendations for business and technology leaders. Welcome, Steph, Keith, and Sri.
Thanks for having us.
So many of you, or at least those that listen to this podcast frequently, might recognize those names and voices as your regular hosts for the podcast. Today, we're going to actually turn the tables on them a bit and tap into their expertise and brains and experience from leading the research behind our recently released portfolio of budget planning guides. So we're going to dig in. The planning guides, the link is available in the show notes as well. But these provide some insight into what business and technology leaders are planning in terms of budgets for 2025, and also Forrester's recommendations on where to invest more, where to cut spending, and then where to make sure you're experimenting. So to level set a little bit, overall, if we turn back the time about 12 months, if you will, last year we saw leaders really being pretty modest and not planning to spend much at all or increase budgets at all as they were moving into 2024. This year looks like they're a little more aggressive, more excited to spend more and planning to spend more. So that's exciting. That's good. Let's dig into where they're planning to spend. If you look across the different types of leaders and the different functions, Steph, tech leaders seem to be the most bullish. 91% of tech leaders expect their budgets to grow in 2025, with the majority of those expecting to increase by 5% or more. So really outpacing inflation, if you will. Are you surprised by that at all, or is it what you were expecting?
No, not surprised. And I think they might end up spending more, especially after the recent CrowdStrike global cyber outage. It revealed a lot of weaknesses in IT monitoring, IT operations, incident response, crisis management. If you look at what they're spending on it, a lot of it is to ensure that AI is successful in the long run. Now that we're past some of the initial hype and the fear of missing out, there's a lot of acknowledgement that we need to invest in the fundamentals. So there'll be a lot to invest in what we're calling pragmatic AI. Security is huge as well. It was actually, even for CIOs and CTOs, it was near the top of the list of where they wanted to invest in. And then there's going to be a lot of investment in technology to cut costs through automation as well. So not surprised at all. I mean, you still have AI, and AI, even if you look at the hyperscalers, they acknowledged how much they're spending on infrastructure and it's eating into their profits. So they're going to have to spend on AI. They're going to have to spend to shore up trust and resiliency. And then it's interesting, the places where they need to save money, which is on people, like over 60% of the IT budget is spent on outsourcing or people. And a lot of the way to keep those costs level is through automation.
Yeah, I want to come back to that in a little bit because I think there is some interesting trend there in terms of tech spend outpacing spend on humans. But we'll come back to that. Marketing leaders, Sri and Keith, I want to dig in on them. They're also pretty optimistic. 87% planning for budget increases, which is pretty impressive, although there's a big difference between the B2C marketers and the B2B marketers, with B2C marketers really planning to spend a lot more versus B2B, who are much more conservative. Let's start with the ones planning to spend a bunch. Keith, surprised? What are they spending on?
Not surprised. There's a lot of experimentation in the market that's out there. There's a lot of investment in tech spends, particularly around data or connecting the data. That requires the infrastructure, which, Steph is talking about. It's probably overlooked in marketing is how large the tech spend is for a marketer, and so that spend continues to go up. It's very expensive to experiment. It's also very expensive to do the fundamentals if you're really going to connect your data. And so I think the AI infusion, into the market has induced a situation where they know they need to connect the data. They need to get the infrastructure right, or they can't take advantage of all these great, AI or Gen AI tools that are out there. You need good data going in. You need to understand your customers, and you need great infrastructure to take advantage of what modern marketing really is, which is very tech oriented.
And need to move fast, right, to stay apace with the competition, I would assume.
Absolutely. It's just you're either leading or you're lagging. And, particularly in consumer marketing, if you're a great brand, you need to invest. You need to invest heavy. You need to get ahead of your competition, or you're going to get left behind in this market. It's just you don't have a choice.
So Shri, it's interesting about B2B marketers, though, are a little bit more conservative. What do you attribute that to? Is it just that they don't necessarily have the support internally to spend more? I assume they want to spend more. I'm sure they're fighting for budget. What's going on there?
I think there's a lot of process and tech sprawl in B2B marketing that this planning season is going to shine a greater light on. And typically in the marketing spend, the program budget takes a big share, but we are seeing that the tech budget, is eating up into the program budget. And, to Keith's point, they're looking for scale, they're looking for efficiency in the process and in their MarTech stack. So I think that's what's triggering, the need to relook at their mix and really think hard about whether the traditional program, personnel, and tech spend really works in the future. The good news is that only 9% are anticipating a decline, which is the good news. But I think just about 35% of B2B marketers are actually increasing their budget or planning to increase their budget 5% or more, which is above the rate of inflation. So I think they are going to be conservative, but they're bullish. They're still bullish. It's just that they're going to be more incisive and deliberate about the choices that they make.
That makes sense. So all three of you have mentioned the whole tech versus or automation versus people and talent bit. If we look across all of the different functions, it's interesting to look at the data, and it makes sense that pretty much every single functional leader now has a second job of also being a tech leader to figure out how to use technology to improve their operations or to innovate, et cetera. But when you look at the split across tech spend versus people spend, talent, or whether that's outsourcing, et cetera, the tech spend in terms of an increase is outpacing talent at this moment across every single function we looked at. So for example, 37% of CX leaders plan to increase tech investments by 5% or more, but only 29% plan to invest personnel by 5% or more. And if you look across the functions, it's very similar trend. What's going on there? Maybe we'll start with CX. Keith, is it that they're just hoping that all this tech is going to automate their way to not having to have as many people and decrease their budgets, or at least streamline their budgets?
I don't know if it's that as much as CX leaders are taking a step back and understanding that they need quality customer data. And there's been an investment in a lot of platforms and a lot of technology. Not all of it is connected. Not all of it is working. And I think there's a real acknowledgement right now is that, getting the fundamentals right, both from a tech standard and on behalf of CX, is really critical to grow. And so no tech wizardry is going to, serve your customers the way you need it. But also just, throwing talent at a problem is not going to solve the issue either. And so I think there's this kind of, we're trying to equalize, the right tech investment with the right talent. Even from the marketing standpoint, it was just a year or so ago, we had our forecast at which, we predicted that there would be smaller, smarter agencies. But on the other hand, the services industry, particularly marketing services, is actually on an amazing growth path. As far as how many people are working at, the large holding co's and so. But it's a different kind of talent. It's less creatives and more technologists. And we're on that curve for the next 3 years. But I think, we're halfway through our projection in which we were going to say we're probably going to be maxing out on talent. I think Michael, placed it like 2028 was going to be max talent, 2027 maybe. We're on our way there, at which now we're realizing, we better get our infrastructure right. We better have connected data, because all the promise of all these new technologies, how we're going to connect with our customers, it can't be realized without that great infrastructure, which I think is where, Steph was going with, where CIOs and CTOs are investing in as well.
Yeah, and there's also a little bit about the cross-training and the partnerships between, let's say, marketing and IT. There's just definitely a realization that, these functions can't go it alone when it comes to AI, when it comes to automation. So they have to be much more smarter about sharing the budget, sharing those resources, finding skills where they are, wherever they are in the organization. And typically between the tech organization or the marketing organization, at least for the B2B marketers, they should consider, an open budget partnership with their IT teams, because it's going to be hard to build that talent pool from scratch, in many of those organizations, unless they look for that somewhere else.
I love that. Maybe they're actually using their IT counterparts to do some of the tech and partnering. Steph, what do you think?
Yeah, everything that Shri and Keith said, I think is mirrors in IT. And like I said, in IT, I was actually shocked at the data myself that over 60% of the budget was being spent either on people or outsourcing. And that's just not sustainable. You can't keep eating up the budget that much. So the only way to bend that curve, flatten that curve, is to invest in technology for scale. And a lot of that is automation. What I would caution, and we did put this in the budget planning guide, is in IT, it's not like you're removing staff. It's more about getting more out of the staff that you have, and also completely retraining them and upskilling them for the future, that they have the right skills. It's why IT is looking at different types of operating models and moving towards platform teams. So it's like, what can you do with the people that you have? How can you enable them and empower them through technology to make the business successful? And work with counterparts in the business. And what we also see too, why there's more spending on tech, I think I'd come back to what Keith was talking about, is it's the fundamentals, which is, if you really want to succeed in the long term, you're going to need the governance in place for AI. You're going to need quality data that's secure, that's private, that's easily accessible through the right data fabric across the organization. And you're going to need the compute and storage and all the infrastructure to make it a reality. So I think there's a recognition that we've got to invest in the basics and then the right kinds of skills, and then empower everybody.
Yeah, investment in AI is investment in data.
Yes.
Right. So that's what leaders are planning. That's what our data tells us about what they're planning for 2025. Let's jump to what our recommendations are. So let's first, we can do this in the three categories that are in the reports of what to invest more in, what to cut spending on, and then what to experiment. So let's do a little bit of a rapid fire on this one in terms of what should they be spending more on? Steph, while I got you, when you've mentioned some of the things they're planning to spend on, what's your biggest recommendation on an area for tech spend that they should be investing more in?
Yeah, I think I'll steal Shri's line, like AI is data. So it's that data foundation. Quality, governance, security, privacy, the fabric that makes it accessible to all of the systems and all of the people that need it. I would start there. Then I would get to the infrastructure. And here we do see significant spending on cloud. I think that is a good place to spend. But I would caution is cloud isn't the answer to everything. These workloads should run wherever it makes sense for the business, both from an effectiveness of the processing, but also for cost perspective. So that might actually be anywhere across your entire environment. It might be at the edge, it might be on the PC, it might be in your own data centers, and it might be in the cloud. So you have to look holistically across that. But all of the technologies might be cloud native. So that's where I would say, instead of cloud first, it's cloud when it makes sense is what people are moving to as well. And then I would say it's security and the skills. And then I would say it's knowledge management as well. If you want to make your people productive and you want to empower them for collaboration, really look at the way that you can operationalize knowledge management through technology. There's some fantastic solutions out there that make it easily for people to collaborate, to share knowledge, to quickly gain the skills and subject matter expertise they need to be effective. So those are some of the key areas.
The knowledge management sounds like it also kind of goes hand in hand with any internal Gen AI work that companies might be doing.
Yeah, there are separate solutions for it. So I wouldn't necessarily say it's synonymous with Gen AI. There's knowledge management solutions that have Gen AI capabilities within them, but they're built right into the solution. So it's not like you have to think about, oh, now I've got to figure out how to integrate Gen AI into what I've done for knowledge management.
Okay. Shri, what about in the world of B2B, marketing, sales, product, top recommendations for where places to invest more in?
So I'm going to do a +1 to Steph as well. Data. Definitely, doubling down on customer data, unification. But I want to add content to that, right? B2B marketers, sales leaders, they spend a lot of time creating content to attract buyers, and creating trust with that content, especially with Gen AI, is even more essential. And how do you actually create AI generated content or AI assisted content in a way that can create that trust? And that's the squishy, messy part that we are in right now. And so content is also something that they need to, invest in the taxonomies and the, understanding what they have available as assets, both internal and external, what they expose to buyers. So that would be one area. And then, doing more with less is a theme for B2B marketers. So where is the growth going to come from? They're going to come from, different routes to market, whether they're marketplaces, whether they're different, B2B e-commerce options, or through partners, right? So that's where the growth is going to come from. It's not just the kind of organic growth that you would, acquisition-oriented growth that you would invest in, but they have to find other places to invest in growth through partners and through other emerging routes to market. And then the other places, as much as they should be doing this anyway, but this year especially, they should be investing in their customer engagement programs, their advocacy programs, nurturing those. Who are those true advocates of your brand, and how do you invest deeply in building those existing relationships? There's this famous saying, right, that you spend way too much on, retaining or acquiring a new customer than retaining an existing customer, right? So that it's a reminder this year, especially with the constrained budgets, that, don't overlook your existing customers.
Well, yeah, constrained budgets to some degree. Also, Keith, we know this is the first year or the biggest drop in CX index results. So customer perception of their experiences with brands is down, kind of at an all-time low. I assume that means spend more on CX, but they got to be doing something differently this year to fix that. What are your top recommendations?
Yeah, I mean, coming out of the COVID years, they really doubled down on their customers and just kind of threw all kinds of things at them. But since then, we've had a little bit of a choppy, economy. There's been cutbacks. There's been, margin compression. There's been all that stuff. There's been inflation, and some of the fundamentals have been waning. And so, the first thing that all of our CX analysts would say is that get the fundamentals right. Both CX professionals and marketers just say is that we don't need more data. We need more quality data. And then let's not overinvest in the digital touch points that just aren't working for our particular customers, And so, what that means is that, you need probably fewer, better digital touch points with your customers, great fluidity between the experiences, whether you're being online, offline, mobile, or other, and that requires quality data. That's also requires what not to invest in, and make sure that the digital touch points that you are investing in, you're doubling down and making sure that they're right, because, consumers are very particular right now. They have a lot of options. And so if your experience is not right, they're going to move on to the next.
So it's a good segue into what not to spend on. This is a fun conversation. We could keep talking about what you should spend on and if budget was no problem. Where to cut? This is always a hard question, but it's going to be required this year. Keith, you are actually starting to get there. It sounds like one of your areas to cut is digital touch points that aren't helping, journey mapping that's not actually providing any value if it's on experiences that aren't critical. Any other thoughts on areas where folks could shave some of their budget off?
Yeah, for the CX professional, it's we spend a lot of time on surveys that just aren't working, as an example. It's just, you got to focus on the areas that, or the research that that's actually going to help you make good decisions. There's a lot of needless tech. Sorry, my tech colleagues. There's a lot of commoditized MarTech that's in there. There's just a lot of overspending on the wrong things and not optimizing for the right things, which again, I go back to connected data, but what that also leads to is that, having the tools that are right for your business buyers or your executives and CEOs that are going to make good decisions. If you don't have great data, or if you just have too many pieces of technology and not the right platforms to provide meaningful business insights, you're not spending on the right things. And so, maybe we've experimented a little bit too much. Maybe we've thinking that we have to be everywhere in every digital touch point. And the reality is that, every brand, every consumer is probably a little unique. And there's a certain set of touch points that they probably love and use. And you just want to be great at that and divest yourself of the rest. Not every brand needs a mobile app.
Yeah, and that's similar in B2B marketing as well, right? Moving away from the siloed approach to, reaching the buyers, right? How can we be channel agnostic and not, we have an SEO strategy, we have an email strategy, we have a social media strategy or whatever that is, and being very siloed in that approach. And, as a result of all of this tech sprawl, it drains productivity. And that's very important to sellers and sales leaders, right? Anything that drains productivity is not a good thing, right? And one of the bullets in one of the planning guides, I think in our revenue operations one, quit trying to scale chaos. And I think that's the part where it's the tech, but it's also the process that comes with the tech that we're trying to scale. And that drains the productivity ultimately.
So, Steph, I assume your recommendation here is kill tech debt or at least reduce tech debt. But can you give more specifics? What technology initiatives should people cut?
I think cloud sprawl. I think, Sri, you just mentioned tech sprawl. Like in core IT, one of the biggest challenges is cloud sprawl. You've had tons of decentralized IT decision-making. You've had lines of business just off being able to buy any SaaS application and subscribe to cloud services that they want. It is actually now probably the number one client question that we get, which is how to control cloud costs and how do we stand up a FinOps practice? Just because it's costing so much. So again, cloud makes a ton of sense. It's going to make sense in the right situations for the right workloads. In the meantime, get your arms around all of the cloud sprawl. It'll save you a ton of money. And it's not that all decision-making will be re-centralized. I mean, the whole point of IT is becoming much more product-centric and working hand in hand with the business in cross-functional teams. But what you can get your arms around is that sprawl, and you can put in some lightweight governance. You can look at your cloud operating model. You can stand up a FinOps practice, cloud center of excellence, and that will control a lot of costs. One specific thing I would say is re-examine all of your VMware licenses. Right now, we have clients whose costs for VMware are going up 300%, 500%. Just because of post-Broadcom acquisition, they made some significant changes to the way it's licensed, as also the way it's packaged. And if you have a very inefficient computing environment, and if you're not using all of the VMware technology, you used to be able to buy it a la carte, but now you'll be forced into very specific bundles. So if you have to buy one of these bundles and you happen to have a very inefficient environment, your costs will go up 300% to 500%. And now is the time to look at that before it happens. Because you can reduce those costs, but you're going to need at least 6 months advance notice to make some of the changes that you're going to need to make. Yeah, you mentioned tech debt. You have to invest a little bit to reduce that tech debt because it requires a lot of standardization. But that's one of the biggest things too, is we have a lot of bespoke environments where, we went for best of breed and we created something net new because we thought it was critical for a particular workload or system. And that just ended up creating much more management overhead and costs. The last area I would say is I'll just come back to people, particularly in IT service desk and help desk. Don't throw people at it when there's amazing technologies for digital employee experience and for conversational AI that will actually provide much better employee experience for a lot less cost than just simply throwing money at the problem. So I had a colleague who said anything that could be automated should be automated. So now's the time to embrace that mantra.
All right, let's shift gears. Experimentation, and I'll put a caveat on this one. We talk about experimentation. We're really focusing on things that you should start experimenting with, but that doesn't mean investing a ton of money in it. Where should leaders plan to start new experiments if they haven't already? Maybe throwing a little budget at it, not over investing, just experimenting for the future.
The good news is that we put all the AI stuff in the invest category. So, there is a little bit of experimentation for sure in the AI space, especially being a bit more deliberate about exactly which use cases you're experimenting versus which you're moving into production and things like that. So you have to have a constant pipeline of things that you are ready to put into production and things you're, willing to experiment with. But for marketers, I wish this was more in the invest category. But, buying groups are critical for B2B marketers. We know that buying patterns have changed. We know there's, generational shift in B2B buyers, which means that the focus on buyer value and customer value is even more critical. This revenue obsession that B2B marketers have had has to shift to customer obsession, which means, understanding the motivations, the needs of the entire buying group versus the MQL. And, our research there has been tremendous, where just, like I said, I wish that was more in the invest category, but I think this is the year that they have to experiment with that shift, with that revenue process transformation shift, in the culture mindset shift, in the change management efforts that would require sales leaders, marketing leaders to, come to the table and say, okay, this is the old ways of doing things are not working. We need a new way. And this is the year that we're going to experiment with that.
There's a lot of appetite for consumers to be able to shop and interact with brands where they actually are. So a great place to experiment is just, social commerce for sure, which means connected data. But it also, with some of these more emerging technologies like Gen AI, investing in a brand-specific Gen AI model is very important, so that you can have or take advantage of the capabilities of a more conversational situation with the brands or the products that you're consuming. And, not every brand's going to get that right out of the gate. And so they need to start experimenting now, while we're in early stages, why the consumer doesn't expect so much magic out of these technologies. They don't have expectations yet. So now's the time to start experimenting in these things so that you can kind of work towards the promise that some of these emerging technologies, these more human-like technologies, will provide us.
Yeah. I think along those lines, to support that, tech leaders should look at multimodal generative AI. So this is AI that can actually encompass a number of different modalities. So it's not just text, it's images, it's code, it's audio, it's video, it's even 3D models. So what that will allow you to do is enable some of what Keith just talked about, which is much more personalized experiences, content creation, customer service, asset management, knowledge management. So it'll just be much more expansive, again, personalized, flexible. So that's definitely an area to experiment in. And you're going to need to train these systems. So another area we're recommending is synthetic data to help train these systems. There is a downside to synthetic data. There is some worry that over time using too much of it will potentially lead to like model collapse, but it could address some of the problems around privacy and just needing the significant amounts of data that you need to really train these systems. So that's another area. And then a couple other areas I would also mention too is something that we're referring to as app generation platforms. Today, one of the most popular use cases for Gen AI is in AI-assisted software development. But right now, it's actually a different AI for each step of the software development lifecycle. In the future, that's going to be an all-in-one platform. And we're starting to see some of those platforms emerging today. So whether you invest in a single platform today or whether you get used to using AI for every step so they can completely collapse the software development lifecycle, start doing that now, because that is the future. There's going to be less and less space between what the business wants and the expression of that in software. And the last area, I'll go really way out there, is quantum security. So people are like, quantum computing, great, Forrester, 5 to 10 years away, if maybe even more. The commercial uses are far away. Unfortunately, the threat actors and their creativity is not that far away. So the data that they're stealing today from you that's encrypted, they're just waiting to decrypt it with quantum in the future. So you really need to look at the kinds of encryption technologies that are going to be quantum safe today, even if you're a company that's not even putting quantum on your radar.
So quantum's way out there, but probably not for security. Security, you should start experimenting now. Great advice.
Even for consumers, I mean, biometrics and different ways of authenticating and making consumers feel like they're safe and they can transact where they are. Like, those are technologies that need to be taken advantage of now. That's where, because some of these technologies are a little clunky. Other ones are better. Like, you need to figure out like what's the right experience for your consumer, and like, privacy, authentication, keeping your money safe. Like, these are real issues that are escalating, and and there's technologies now at a consumer level and an enterprise level that need to be taken advantage of.
And even with sales teams, experimenting with biometric feedback on selling patterns and, seller behavior. So that's an area that we've mentioned to experiment with, and kind of going all the way back to data. With B2B, marketers struggle a lot with first-party data. So they should be thinking about, okay, should we have a zero-party data strategy given all of the data deprecation? So kind of going back all the way up to investing in data, I think B2B marketers should create a zero-party data strategy with all the flip-flopping that's going on with data deprecation, especially with Google. So they're going to be left with no data, and they need to have a way to collect and analyze data from their buyers that is truly reflective of what they want and what they intend to buy.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, getting back to the quality data, situation, the investment in, first party data or data that you're getting directly from your consumers through your experiences and how to be able to take advantage of that. Those are critical platforms and critical pieces of technology to take advantage of now.
All right, so let's go all the way back to where we started. Business and tech leaders having what I'd call measured optimism, if you will, in terms of their budgets and being able to spend more in 2025. But they still have to get through the budgeting process in most cases. So quick word of advice to leave folks with on how to make sure that they get through the budgeting process with some money to be able to invest and make it happen.
I think for the IT leaders out there, at the time of this recording, we're about a week from the major global cyber outage. That's still fresh in everyone's minds. Actually, I saw one of the airlines today saying that they might have lost close to $500 million on it. And I know other businesses, healthcare was impacted, government was impacted. And IT did its best to recover as quickly as it could, but it exposed a lot of weaknesses in IT. Use this moment to tell business leaders that we need this spending and we need even more if we're going to improve resiliency. Now's the time to rethink resiliency and trust, and also alignment and adaptivity and all the key ingredients of high performance IT. So use this crisis to your advantage. Don't, overemphasize it, but point out what you guys did well, and then embrace what you did wrong and come up with a plan for how you're going to fix it and use that to drive more budget.
Great advice. Shri, what would you say to B2B marketing, sales, product leaders?
I'll pull on the alignment thread. I think to get through this process, the key is going to be to prioritize collaboration and those cross-functional partnerships, because those budget increases are going to feel tiny, and to make them feel big, you got to do some silo busting at this point and make sure that you're building those key partnerships with sales leaders, IT leaders, across functional leaders as well as technology teams. I think that's going to be the area where, that's going to help them get through the season.
Keith, I'll give you the final word here.
So invest in quality, not quantity. Quality data. Invest in the touch points that you know that your customers really want, and just do it really, really well. Consumers are willing to spend. They just don't want to spend on a lot of things. They're a little bit more choosy, and you want to be able to deliver those experiences that you know that your customers are going to love and they're going to stay with you. And that means having great infrastructure, great data, great experiences. They don't need every touch point. They don't want that. They just want the best experience they can have with you, where they want to, interact with you and where they want to buy.
Love that advice. Need to be very intentional, very collaborative, and don't let a good crisis go to waste. We'll leave it there. Steph, Keith, Shri, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
If you like what you heard today, subscribe to Forrester's What It Means podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast player. To continue the conversation, follow Forrester on LinkedIn or drop us a note at podcast@forrester.com. Thanks for listening.